biggest and the most dangerous one certainly is the thing in the Ukraine. It has the prospect of turning into World War III. In fact, as we speak, it is turning into World War III. The NATO countries, which is really to say the U.S., have backed the Russians into a corner, and the Russians are going to have to react. Now, how they react, I don't know. That's unpredictable. But the only thing we have going in our favor to save us from being turned into cinders is the fact that Putin is very well educated, very historically knowledgeable, very centered, thoughtful, and prudent, certainly by comparison with any of the other world leaders he's confronting. And I know it's very dangerous for me to say something like this. I'd be called a Putin apologist, but I'm just picking the best of a bad bunch, actually, when I say that. It's a question of an obviously failing power, seeing rising powers, thinking that it has to act and put down the rising powers before they get too strong and too out of control. And at this point, the U.S. is the failing power. That's what the $35 trillion of acknowledged debt is all about. And they can see that, for instance, with the coming election in November, it doesn't matter if Trump wins or Biden wins. And incidentally, I'll just parenthetically throw out, I'd say the chances of Biden actually running slim and none, and Slim's out of town. But that's a whole different conversation. The U.S. is becoming quite unstable in a lot of ways. And a lot of these people think in terms of, well, war has always been good to the U.S. in the past. Maybe what we need to do is start a foreign war. Serves several purposes. It distracts the people within the United States, which it does. It unites them, which it does. They think that this coming war, it seems, will be like the last war, where the U.S. will go from strong to stronger. I don't think so. The U.S. is not in the same position as it used to be in all kinds of ways. War really doesn't do anybody any good. I mean, we can argue about that. War is good, bad, it's necessary. But I'd like to see an argument why this war, which is building, could possibly be good and why it could be necessary. I think it can only reduce the standard of living. That's all there is to it, because war creates nothing. It only destroys things. That's the bottom line. I'm simply anti-war. That's all there is to it. I want to point out that I'm a long-term optimist. In fact, I think the future is not only going to be better than you imagine, but better than you can imagine. And why is that? The track record of humanity starting 12,000 years ago after the end of the last ice age, it's been up, but up on a hyperbolically accelerating curve, especially since the Industrial Revolution. And there's no reason why that should end at this point with the evolution of nanotechnology and artificial intelligence and robotics and biotech and many other things. So there's lots of cause for optimism from that point of view. And the second reason is that the average person is wired in a way like a squirrel, where we genetically feel we have to produce more than we consume and save the difference, well, so you can last through the winter. So there's plenty of reason to be super optimistic about the future, and I am, okay? So why am I pessimistic about the next 10 years, at least? Well, the specter of war at this point is building up, and the destruction from this coming war, nuclear, biological, cybernetic, is potentially much greater than World War II could be. And it could stop those two mainsprings that I mentioned that are keeping mankind moving forward. But one thing that people don't adequately consider is the amount of debt in the world. People look on debt as just something that's out there. It'll be handled. It'll be paid off. But what are we talking about with debt? Most of the debt in the world, all of the government debt, quite frankly, which is most of the debt, is consumption debt. And when you have consumption debt, it means that it's not there to produce new things, build new factories or whatever. It can be paid off one of two ways, either by mortgaging your future or by taking the savings of others in the past and dissipating it. So debt in itself is not a good thing, especially not government debt, which is always consumption debt as opposed to production debt. So that's a very big thing. The amount of regulation in the world, which is stopping producers from producing and distorting the way the market works. That's a major thing. Inflation of the currency. I mentioned that one of the two things that make me optimistic about the future is that the average guy sets aside things, produces more than he consumes and saves. But what does he save in? He saves in the local currency. But if the local currency is destroyed, his savings are destroyed. And I think inflation is going to get completely out of control because modern monetary theory has been accepted. And what that means is that the government really can create all the money it wants and blow it into society. And they think if inflation gets too bad, well, we'll just tax some of it out from places that we want to tax it out of. And don't forget, the U.S. now is running $2 trillion of annual deficits. And the central bank, the Fed, is buying it all and printing money, in effect, in order to do so. Well, I don't think it is. So he acknowledges the fact that debt is a problem. And at some point, the people that owe the debt may not be able to pay it. That's going to have negative consequences. But how is building new infrastructure going to solve the debt problem? This is very unclear why he jumped to that conclusion. And what really disturbs me about what he just said is that should be done with a public-private partnership. Well, that's an insane statement. Public-private partnerships are things that shouldn't even exist. I'm not going off on a tangent here, but I've got to mention this. The U.S., in fact, most of the world, have fascist economic systems. People say, what are you talking about, fascism? Fascism has nothing to do with jackboots and big flags and this type of thing. It's an economic system. The word fascism was coined by Benito Mussolini, and what it means is it's a partnership between the corporations and the state. And of course, fascism as a system treats people in corporations, big corporations, like Larry Fink, very well. But I think it's a bad thing. Well, what does the government bring to the party? It produces nothing. It's a dead hand on society. It's not necessary. And in principle, the problem with the government is that it's pure coercion. As Mao Tse-tung said, certainly one of the world's leading experts on government, is the power of government comes out of the barrel of a gun. And if you believe in a society based on cooperation as opposed to coercion, you want to limit institutionalized coercion. And that's what the state is. It's not we the people. It's the people in the government controlling the rest of us in the economy at all. Forget about a public-private partnership. I don't think it's because of the command structure of the economy. It's because when Deng Xiaoping, in about 1980, he said, what was his famous phrase? And it doesn't matter whether we have a black cat or a white cat, as long as it catches mice, and to be wealthy is to be rich is to be wonderful, whatever the phrase was he used. It was well stated. I'm not stating it the way he did. The reason for progress in the Chinese economy is that it was tremendously freed up and has been freed up until quite recently. So it's not that the state was controlling things. Wherever the state sticks its finger, it creates distortions and misallocations of capital, corruption, wastage. The reason China has done as well as it has, and what has happened since Deng freed it up over the last 40 years, is actually, well, it's one of the biggest things in world history, quite frankly. China went from being a completely backward police state with poor, ignorant peasants to one of the fastest growing and most prosperous in world history, quite frankly. But it's not because of the prudent guidance of the Chinese Communist Party. That's just a scam for the people that are members of the party, because China was largely really freed up. It was one of the best places in the world to be an entrepreneur, to be a producer over the last 40 years. That's changing now because Xi seems to have a different philosophy, and he's the new helmsman that is steering the ship. I think Xi is steering the ship onto the rocks. But the progress of China is not because the government was guiding it. It's because the government wasn't, by and large, guiding it over the last 40 years. Everything becomes obvious in retrospect. But is there anything right now that's as much of a one-way street as gold was back in the early 70s? Well, to start with, let me say that I view gold as not anymore as a speculative medium. I view it as a savings medium. It's not an investment. An investment is an allocation of capital to produce new capital. And owning gold doesn't do that. That's why Warren Buffett says that it's like a pet rock. It doesn't produce anything. Well, a $100 bill doesn't produce anything either. So, is there any gold look-alike now? I continue to use gold as a savings vehicle. It's treated me very well. Something that I was buying for $35 is now $2,300. So it's treated me very well over the years. But what is like gold back in 1971? If I was going to pick a commodity, I guess the commodity I would pick now would be uranium. I think it's going to be a one-way street. It's got to go a lot higher. Why? Because the world is going to go to nuclear power. Nuclear is the safest, the cheapest, and the cleanest form of mass power generation, vastly superior to so-called green power. And I know the things that I said about safest, cleanest, and cheapest, people are probably saying, what? How can that be? I've never heard that. That's crazy. And we can talk about that, but then this would be a show about uranium and nuclear power. And I don't know if you want to go that way, but I'll make that assertion and I can defend it anytime you'd like. Anyway, at this point, assuming that the world is going to go electric with EVs and with giant server farms that are needed for AI and other things, the only way that power can be generated is with nuclear, at least until fusion comes on board. And the money that's being spent for so-called green energy, which is to say photovoltaic and wind energy, is a huge misallocation. It's fine for certain applications in certain places. That's fine. But it's not meant for the mass powering of an industrial civilization. So the answer to the question is uranium, which you'll need for the nuclear power plants.